The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly in the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. And let's connect you to Delegate Scott Surovell today from Northern Virginia. Good to see you, sir.
Great to be back, Woody.
I know there's a lot of issues on the agenda. You Democrats won all three statewide offices, the governor's job, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general. There was a special election yesterday in Loudoun County. There's a new Democratic state senator. There is a new Democratic state senator subject to recount. Looks like the Senate may come under the control of Democrats. How does it feel being yet in the minority in the House of Delegates?
Being in the minority can be frustrating at times, but it doesn't bother me. I mean, I'd like to be in the majority, obviously, but being a practicing criminal defense lawyer, I'm used to
being the underdog,
trying to climb the hill. Yeah, and so you adjust your expectations in the right place, and just make sure you remember that you have a role in the system, even if you are in the minority, to make sure that there is a point of view that's articulated, that your constituents' points of views are heard, that the other side knows you're there, and there are opportunities to participate in the process in terms of making a difference all the time on a daily basis, and you just have to remember that you have to get things done in a little bit different way if you're in the minority than when you're in the majority. So.
Number of issues on your plate affecting your constituency, especially along Route 1. Talk to us about those.
Right. Yeah, well, the Route 1 corridor basically defines the 44th district. It runs right down the middle and about 9 miles of it from the city of Alexandria down through Fort Belvoir. And last year, Senator Poehler and I were able to secure $2 million to fund what's now called the Route 1 Multimodal Transit Analysis Study, which is a study which is looking at all the different modes of transit, land use, population growth, and it's looking out like 20, 30, 40 years into the future to try and figure out exactly what Route 1 ought to look like, how many lanes it ought to have, what transit options ought to be configured either in the roadway or perhaps under it if you're talking about Metro. And so right now they're doing a lot of modeling and to come up with the preliminary recommendations, but it's my hope that the recommendation when it's concluded will be that they'll be recommending an extension of the yellow line from Huntington through Beacon Hill, through Hybla Valley, and all the way down to Fort Belvoir. Alternatively, they might come up with dedicated bus lanes or light rail, we'll see, or perhaps a mix of the two. Metro part of the way, something else the rest of the way until the money or the population is there to support more. But it's that issue is a huge issue for my district. And on top of that, I've put in a $4 million budget amendment this year to fund the preliminary engineering and the environmental studies that are necessary to implement whatever the study we're doing right now recommends, so that we can start laying the groundwork to fund an actual project and not just continue to do studies and focus on it. And so in terms of the future of the 44th district, of the part of the county that I live in, it's absolutely critical because everything flows from people being able to get in and out of Route 1. And right now it's just a kind of a sclerotic mess. It's all very, there's a lot of congestion, and a lot of developers don't want to make an investment in the area until they know what the future is going to be for that stretch of road.
So you're laying the foundation for the creation of more commercial development, more jobs, diversifying your economy there.
Right, and housing revitalization, a lot of things. It's all kind of tied together, and we need to do more to make the Route 1 corridor an attractive place for families to live again, so that we can compete with areas like Reston or Arlington or Western Fairfax or Loudoun in terms of the competition for families, so we can keep our area the vibrant place that it's always been.
So looking out into the future, if everything goes as you anticipate in terms of legislation and funding, when do you see this revitalization starting to take effect?
Well, I think you'll start to see some revitalization start as soon as we actually get a plan down that everybody agrees. For 30 years, the Route 1 corridor has been fighting with itself about what it wants to be. And it's our hope that this plan will finally bring the community to some consensus as to what we want our community to look like for the next 30 years so that people can start to make investments. And so I think as soon as we get that plan, you'll see that. In terms of funding and improvement, that's going to be a real challenge because widening Route 1, they say, is about an $800 million project. Extending the metro is about a $4 billion project. And the Northern Virginia money that we just passed last year is only about $300, $400 million a year. And they're not going to give all of it to Route 1 for all of Northern Virginia. And so funding these projects are going to be a real challenge too. And but once we get it on the books, then we can start to have the funding discussions and start to push in that regard. We need to get people like not just the state and localities to the table. We also need to get the United States Army at the table. We need to get other federal monies that are available for transit. And once we have that plan in place, we can start talking about funding. And so I would say maybe 10 to 20 years is what we're looking at in terms of completion of the widening of the road and or the extension of the metro or whatever other mode of transit they pick.
So where do people work in your district? Who are the largest employers?
The largest employers in my district, I would say, first of all, the public sector is huge. There's a lot of federal government employees. There's also probably a lot of local government employees, teachers, things like that. Right. There's not a lot of large private employers in my district. I would suspect that in the 44th, the largest private employer might either be Walmart or Safeway. But after that, once you get out of the retail side, it's probably the Mount Vernon estate. 1 million people a year go through Mount Vernon, and it's the largest historic tourist asset in the state. It has double the visitation of Williamsburg. It has about triple Monticello. And a lot of people go through Mount Vernon. But most of the employment is kind of, after you get past the government employers and the schools and things like that, it's mostly retail up and down Route 1.
So there's a real need to transition away from federal government funding, not funding, but employment, because of sequestration and issues that are affecting the nation as a whole out of Washington, D.C.
Now, when you if you look at the economic stats, the House Appropriations Committee gives us a briefing every year. Employment growth in Northern Virginia has really been depressed over the last year as compared to how it usually goes because most people say because of both sequestration and the shutdown fight that happened, that it caused a lot of government and government contractor hiring to stall. But you've definitely seen a little bit of a slowdown in Northern Virginia compared to what's usual. Actually, Hampton Roads, I think, has led the state in employment growth for the last year, which is unusual. It's usually Northern Virginia that leads. But we'll see. I mean, I think the future is bright in Northern Virginia and in Virginia in general. But 44th District is a great place to live. I mean, we have access to Maryland, D.C.
Right.
You can get to Tyson's, if you're willing to put up with the traffic. People in my district work all over the place. Most of them go north to, if they commute, they go north to D.C., but a few of them go west like me out to Fairfax. But
Good. I know another issue that affects your constituency and affects residents of the state is the question of car title predatory lending. I know you have some legislation addressing that issue.
Yeah, this is my second time taking a shot at car title lending. Back in 2011, the General Assembly passed legislation that I voted against to expand car title lending to people with out-of-state car titles. There's some concern in Hampton Roads about the effect that would have on active duty military members because they tend to have their cars titled out of state and to some extent North Carolina. My concern was that the 44th District being right next to the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, D.C. and Maryland, which have much tighter restrictions, that it would cause a flood of people coming across the bridge to get what are basically pretty high interest predatory loans, and that the Route 1 corridor would become a sort of a hub for these businesses. And since we passed that legislation, 8 car title lenders have opened on a 7-mile stretch of road. And it's not the kind of development we were seeking, or economic development we've been seeking to bring to the Route 1 corridor. We were trying to bring sort of high-end businesses and attract better retailers, better restaurants. And when you have 8 car title lenders up and down the road, it just reinforces an image of the area that we don't want to perpetuate. And it's not necessarily totally because of the demographics of our district, but it's because we're right next to D.C. and Maryland and have these restrictive rules, and they want to locate right there to get people across the bridge. So my legislation would allow Board of Supervisors to limit the number of car title lenders in a specific area. I put it in last year, didn't get a lot of support. I'm trying again this year. We'll see where it goes.
Great. Now, ethics reform. That's been in the news since last year. It's always a subject of great debate. I know you were called upon to address this issue some time ago at the national level. We have the outgoing governor who was just indicted. Talk to us about the need for ethics reform and just your opinions on that subject.
And we know the governor's indictment just came down last night, and I read the indictment. I think it's 46 pages long, and it's a very troubling document when you go through and read everything that's in it. And I'm proud to say that I was one of the first. I was either the first or one of the first to call on the governor to resign and to call for the legislature to take some action. And one of the things that this whole episode has highlighted is just how ineffective Virginia's ethics laws are. We should not have to rely on the United States Attorney's Office or the federal government to do our ethics policing. We should do it ourselves. And the Constitution of Virginia actually designates the House of Delegates as the place where ethics begins and ends, and we didn't take any action. And so I actually introduced 6 or 7 different ethics bills. 3 of them have been copied verbatim by some of my Republican colleagues and reintroduced, and so I'm pretty confident those have a pretty good chance. They're actually up in committee today.
Great. That's a high form of flattery.
Yeah. Yeah. I had 7 bills taken this year, which is a new record for me. Yeah, I've got the 3 that were taken. One would put a cap or some restrictions on the attorney's fees that the Attorney General can spend when he hires outside counsel to represent somebody like the governor or in some kind of collateral proceeding. Right now, the Attorney General just hires whoever he wants. We were paying $450 an hour to some firm. The governor's run up $750,000 at taxpayer expense with no restriction for outside representation. My legislation would put a cap and some restrictions on that. The second bill that I think will have a shot prohibits anybody from giving a gift to the Attorney General while the Attorney General is litigating a case with that person. The Attorney General took a turkey dinner and some vacation time, and his staff went and spent time in Johnny Williams' home while they were litigating a tax dispute with him. And then I have a third bill as well on ethics. I'm trying to remember what it is right now. It says that if you're negotiating a Governor's Opportunity Fund grant, you're not allowed to make a contribution to the governor. The governor has about $50 million to give out in grants to corporations around the state to try and encourage economic development. And I found that if you look at the corporations that have received grants, if they made a contribution to a statewide candidate, on average, they received a grant that was twice as large as Governor's Opportunity Fund grant recipients who did not.
Really?
Yes. And I think we ought to make sure that there's a clear separation on Governor's Opportunity Fund grants and political contributions. And that bill was, I think, introduced by Jim LeMunyon. He took my bill and put the same bill in, and so hopefully that'll get some traction.
There are similar bills on the Senate side, I take it.
Not on those topics.
Not on those topics.
My law partner, Senator Peterson, actually put in a bill that was similar to mine on the outside attorney's fees, but he had a kind of a different approach. But, you know, once these things go over to the Senate and come back and the governor amends them, we'll see how it all turns out.
What about the necessity to create a commission to provide advice and counsel, to make sure that the necessary disclosures are being made and that the public has the transparency it needs?
No, there's no question we need an ethics commission. We need an independent body to look at this stuff, to give us advice on it, and also to investigate and to make recommendations on discipline for people that are not following the rules. And the proposal that's been made so far was introduced, I think, on Friday in probably about a 60-page bill, which I've read. It creates an advisory commission that can meet and give advice and recommend discipline. I don't think it goes far enough, though. It does not have any subpoena power. It does not have any sort of mandated investigatory power. For example, I think that all the documents we file should be subject to random audit, and I think they should be mandated to audit at least a certain number of documents every year. I mean, right now, there's more of a chance of being caught cheating on your taxes than there is putting down a misstatement on one of these forms that we file. And I also think that they ought to have a clearer sort of independent ability to prosecute. Right now, they just refer it to somebody else for prosecution, and somebody else makes the decision. And the problem with most of the people that prosecute in Virginia is they're political. whether you're talking about the Attorney General or Commonwealth Attorney, they're all elected. And we need to figure out a way to sort of remove the politics from the enforcement side of this. And so I hope what we do, I think we will have an ethics commission, but I think what's proposed so far doesn't go far enough.
Now, how does the governor's executive order that applies to his office and his staff compare to what's going on in the General Assembly?
The governor's proposal is much more comprehensive. First of all, it's got a $100 gift cap. What's been proposed in the General Assembly, I think, is a $250 tangible gift cap, which does not cover intangible gifts, which would cover things like travel. I can't remember whether meals is tangible or intangible, but most of the big gifts that legislators receive, the bigger ones, are intangible. I mean, there obviously are tangible gifts, but the governor's proposal is much more restrictive in terms of what his staff is doing. And you know, there's going to be a lot of discussion and negotiation and about this as it all goes forward. You know, people talk about there being a gift cap at the federal level, but you know, at the federal level they have a cap, but they also can travel.
Right.
And so they have a special travel act. And so, you know, the way all this stuff actually plays out, the reality of it is a lot more complicated than I think it comes out in the press sometimes. But we'll see. We've just started the discussions, and this indictment just happened yesterday, and who knows, that might even change the discussion.
Right.
So.
Right. Now, turning to transportation, I know that, and by the way, congratulations on the initiative that resulted in a new transportation bill last year. But there are some problems with it, as you know, one of which relates to encouraging people to buy hybrid cars. And I know you have an issue with that.
Right. Yeah, you know, the transportation bill was really a mixed bag, and I actually voted against it. I was one of only, I think, 7 Democrats that voted against it for about 5 or 6 different reasons. I ended up voting for the amendments after the governor honored a petition. Senator, when it came out, it originally had a $100 hybrid tax, a tax on hybrid vehicles per year. Senator Eben and I led a petition drive, and 7,500 Virginians signed a petition demanding that the governor repeal the hybrid tax. He ended up making an amendment to lower it to $64 a year, which I voted for that when the amendments on the bill came through to clean it up at the veto session we had. And today, the legislation to repeal, I introduced legislation to repeal, so did Senator Eben and probably about 10 other legislators. And it's cleared the Senate, and it's up for a floor vote in the House, I think, tomorrow on Thursday or Friday. And so far in the House, it passed the House Finance Committee 20-1. So I'm really hopeful that that tax will be repealed. It's awful policy. And for a lot of different reasons. I mean, from my point of view, it's about equivalent to taxing non-smokers or taxing vegetables or something. I mean, we usually don't tax people for doing the right thing.
Here's something that's still puzzling to me. I know that there was a provision to garner revenue from the federal government that was contingent upon the passage of the Internet Tax Freedom Act, I think. That hasn't been passed by Congress yet. So what happens to those monies that were devoted to that?
Well, I think what the bill has is that when that money comes in, it goes a certain place,
okay.
and some other taxes go down, I think is what happens.
Okay. But what if Congress never passes that bill? Is there something built in to make up the difference in terms of increasing the gas tax or the percentage or something like that?
I think what happens is the sales tax adjusts if that money comes. I think is how it works. My recollection is that the revenue coming in will stay the same whether Congress does that or not.
Right,
but if Congress does that, then some other state taxes will go down to make up the difference. That's my recollection as to what was passed.
So what impact so far has the funding had on your district? You mentioned some $300 to $400 million.
Right. Well, you know, one of the reasons I voted against the bill was because I was very concerned that the funding package last year would not impact the 44th district. It was only $300 or $400 million a year, and the widening of Route 1 is an $800 million project, and the extension of the Metro is a $4 billion project. And there's just no way you could spend probably 15 years worth of the money in the 44th district alone. There's probably 26 delegates in Northern Virginia. And so, from my point of view, it really wasn't enough money to really even begin to do the projects that are needed. It's money that will help fund things like intersection improvements, maybe some bridges, segments of road here and there, but I had concerns about whether it would be enough for the 44th. And we'll see. I mean, one of the things, this $4 million that I'm trying to secure this session, I'm trying to get, if the $4 million, if they won't fund it all out of the state, to do a match where perhaps the state will put up some, and we can get some of that NVTA money to match it, and perhaps we might be able to get that NVTA money to fund pieces of Route 1, maybe like a mile at a time or something, or 2 miles at a time, which is not the best way to do a project, but that's the only way that money will end up helping the 44th, aside from like doing some sidewalks or bus stops. Or the 44th is not a place that needs, you know, a $50 million intersection here or there. The intersections we need are like $100 million a piece, because they have to be raised up in the air, and and so you know, we'll see. I mean, obviously my constituents drive on all over Northern Virginia, and I'm sure that that they'll be benefited in some way by some project in some other part of the county that they use, or some jobs that are created, or the reduced tax burden on my part of the county by increasing commercial development somewhere else or whatever. But you know, the money is just starting to now trickle through, and the projects are just starting to be funded, and so we'll see how it plays out. But at the end of the day, we have about $80 billion of projects over the next 20 years we still haven't funded yet. And my concern was that bill last year was our one opportunity to do it. We do this once every 28 years. That's the cicada cycle plus 10 years. I mean, and I don't want to be back here, you know, at age 70 having the next debate. And that was my concern, is that's kind of the way we do things nowadays, it seems.
How are the local school districts faring, and what's the reaction to the need to reform the standards of learning?
Schools are a really touchy issue in the 44th district. A lot of people don't realize it, but there were 12 schools in Fairfax County, 12 mainline schools in Fairfax County that were accredited with a warning about 4 months ago. Half of those schools, 6 of those 12 schools, are in the 44th district, even though there's 16 legislators in Fairfax County. I represent about 7% of the county, and my district has half the schools that were accredited with a warning. And it's a real problem, because if that continues, the state will end up taking those schools over and take them away from the Fairfax County School Board.
That's a result of legislation that was passed last year as well.
The takeover, right? Yes, legislation that I opposed. But yeah, the Governor's Opportunity Initiative, or the Opportunity Education Institute, or whatever they call it. But the schools are really, our students are struggling on these standardized tests in the 44th district. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But you know, a lot of it's poverty-driven, it's income, family demographics driven, it's foreign language driven. 29% of the people in the 44th district were born in another country. So we need to figure out a way to get these schools performing. And I'm very interested in the SOL testing reform discussion that's going on. The tests, as they're administered right now, there's too many tests, and teachers are teaching the test too much, and I'm not sure how good it is at the end of the day. But another thing, though, that I'm working on really hard, which I think would be excellent for my part of the county, and in fact for the entire state, was legislation I introduced which would require any school system that's using electronic textbooks to provide a computer, or to have a plan in place to ensure that every child in the school system has a computer and has broadband at home by July 1 of 2017. And that's a real problem in the 44th district, where half my kids have computers and half of them don't even have broadband or computers at home, and they're being forced to do their homework and their studies using a computer. It's completely unfair. And Cox Communications, Comcast, some other groups are offering extremely low-cost broadband and computer plans to families, and most of these families don't know these plans exist. And I'm hopeful that we can start to stimulate interest and involvement in that, so these kids can compete on an equal playing field, so the kids on both sides of Route 1 can have access to the same tools, so they can both excel in school equally.
Great.
So we don't have these schools with different performances. That's another big thing I'm doing this session.
Great. Well, we need to continue to educate the public on those initiatives. Two huge issues. One, the result of a recent tragedy with one of your colleagues in the state Senate. regarding mental health care and necessary reforms, and then the expansion of Medicaid. Talk to us about those two big issues.
Yeah, big is right. You know, given the demographics of the 44th district, it has the largest Medicaid population of any delegate seat in all of Northern Virginia.
Wow.
16% of the people in the 44th now receive their health care from Medicaid. And 90% of those people are children. It's actually 9,000 kids. So if you're under the age of 18 and you live in the 44th district, there's a 1 in 3 chance you get your health care from Medicaid. And you can almost be certain that for every family that has one of those children, that those parents are uninsured. And so the expansion of Medicaid is absolutely critical, so that for the 44th especially, so that we can get health care to everybody, so that they don't have that uncertainty in their life. It's also a big issue for Mount Vernon Hospital, which has been a huge issue. There's been talk every once in a while about closing it down. I think we're way past that. I think Inova is on the road to, they're actually expanding it right now. But Mount Vernon sees a ton of emergency people getting their health care, primary health care, from the emergency room. 22306 and the 22309 zip codes have the highest percentage of non-acuity emergency room visits of any zip code in Northern Virginia by far. And so we got to expand Medicaid so we can get these costs under control, so families can get health care, and so we're not, everybody who has private insurance, like my business, private health insurance, aren't getting these double-digit premium increases. It's a critical piece of the puzzle in terms of health care. Mental health is a continuing struggle. We need to put more money into mental health so that we have enough beds, so that if families have family members in distress, they can get their family members the help they need. You know, I see the consequences of this every day in my criminal practice. You know, a lot of times I represent people that end up having underlying mental health problems that will cause them to do something like shoplift or drunk driving or sometimes something violent, unfortunately. But, you know, these are problems we need to really start dealing with. But at the end of the day, most of it comes down to funding, and we got to find the money.
Yeah, extending the duration of time an individual who may have mental health issues can be detained are the subject of some of the bills, but you have to balance that against their civil rights and the public safety.
Yep. No, the very first trial I ever had was a mental health commitment proceeding. And so, you know, I'm pretty familiar with those. And, you know, whenever the government takes you and holds you, you have to follow due process. And people have rights in those situations. And a lot of times you can't find a judge fast enough to hear a case, and so they're forced to release somebody. We'll see if we do reforms on that. But the real thing at the end of the day is money.
Great. We'll end it there. They're telling me we're just about out of time.
Okay.
Good to have you, Delegate Scott Surovell.
Great. Thanks to be.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.